Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new year and to My Faith with Homer and Pip. We have a special guest as always. But first, Homer, we kick it to you.
Normally it's Mother Teresa, but not so. It was Coach Carter, our last guest, correct?
Yes, Coach.
Yes, and he has a phrase that I will use forever that everyone should say to everyone else. I wish I could ask Mother Teresa how much she'd like it. The world is a better place because you're a part of it.
So thankful that Brent made that connection. I was talking to a friend last night who told me he never believed in God, but back in 1973, he had a head-on collision. I believe he was on a motorcycle at 60 miles an hour, thrown into a ditch. It was deep, it was dark. He was knocked unconscious. When he came to, his head was on a rock. And he said, well, I'm gone now. There's nobody here who can possibly. And then he went back to sleep. Then he got up. All of a sudden, he saw a car. He noticed a woman in the car, started waving and yelling, but she just passed by. And he said, I've got to be a goner. Turns out the woman was a nurse. Back then, they didn't have cell phones. She drove home, got her husband, called the ambulance, and basically saved my friend's life. He had gone to feel for his leg. It was gone. To this day, of course. He has that one leg, but his faith has born anew on that fateful day some 50 years ago. Lois Severson is our guest. She is an absolute angel. So thankful to make this connection. And again, as always, Homer, you kick us off on My Faith with Homer and Pip, produced by the great Brent Young.
I don't know Lois yet, but I know this. I'll always remember, among other things, how she chooses to start. It's my faith, Lois. There are no rules. I want to know how you decide to start your faith story. Take it away.
I guess I'm curious as to what you want to know. I guess I've always had a strong faith because I came from a wonderful farm family. I grew up around Cross Plains, Black Earth, Wisconsin, west of Madison. My mom and dad were very religious. I have 7 older sisters that all became school sisters of St. Francis, down on Layton Boulevard, if you're familiar with that order. So we had a strong, my mom was the spiritual leader of our family. She, my dad always said she went to church to pray for enough rain for the crops to grow, but he says, I have to go with her so that I pray we don't get too much rain and it all floods and destroys the crops. But we had a wonderful background there growing up on that family farm. I have to say that would have to be the start of it.
Wait a minute. You have 7 sisters, all became nuns?
Yes, yes.
That's not possible. That's
Well,
that's
it
like
is.
the all-time record, and you were the 8th?
Yes, I had temporary vows. A priest from our parish thought I had a vocation too, and I thought that I didn't. I felt that I wanted to do something different than my 7 older sisters, but he talked me into it. He thought I had a vocation. So I also went to the convent, and in 1960, I was received, and our picture, all 8 of us are pictured in the Milwaukee Journal that next morning because there were 8 of us in that community with my mom and dad, of course. And I have a younger sister, number 9 in the family. She never tried the convent. But anyway, I just had temporary vows with them because as I went along in my education, I got a wonderful education from them. And I worked 4 years teaching for them to pay for my education so that when I left without taking permanent vows, I didn't have to pay for my college because they figured I taught each year for the college that I got. I mean, that's how they reasoned it in those days. But I left in 1967 and I went to, I had been teaching for 4 years in Hales Corners, which you're familiar with, a wonderful community. And then when I left the convent, I taught for 2 years in Madison Public Schools. And my mom was living in Cross Plains and she was a new widow. So I thought, well, I'll live with her because she's lonely. My dad just died. Well, then after 2 years of that, I decided to come back to Milwaukee because I liked living down here better from my experience at Hales Corners. And so when I moved back to Milwaukee in 1969, I met my husband. And we dated for about 3 years and got married in 1972, a wonderful guy, Bob. And we've been married for 51 years now. And so I've had a wonderful life. Probably, I considered it heaven when this tragedy of our daughter happened. I looked back at my life and I thought, gee, the years of teaching, I taught 35 years, grades 7, 8, and 9, and raising 2 girls and a wonderful husband. I really considered that heaven on earth. So I thought, I guess I got to have a little hell here, when this tragedy hit us in 2005. But
Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I got to go back to the beginning.
okay,
So the first daughter becomes a nun, and then the second one how is that the standard? How that's not human. They're then the third one goes, well, I guess I'm going to be a nun too. And then the fourth, and then the fifth. These are human beings, young girls growing up.
yes, yes. And you have to understand, though, that it's a farm community, and we had the School Sisters of St. Francis teaching in a private school in Cross Plains, and our parents drove 6 miles to take us to that private school because we were 6 miles away from town where we lived. But we had a carpool with the neighbors, the other farming people around us. So we carpooled, and there were enough people so that everybody had to drive just 1 day a week and take us to school. And we had those sisters who edified us. And I have to emphasize, 2 of my sisters became missionaries. The third oldest was 40 years in Honduras, and she rehabilitated juvenile delinquents that were sentenced by the government because of their crimes. And at the end of her experience, she came home in 1998 because she was 70 years old then, and thought that was getting a little too rough for her down there because some of the boys sent to them were murderers. They were like 17 and 18 and they had committed murder, yet they were sent to her establishment because they weren't adult men yet. But her goal was to keep them from being in an adult prison, because down in Honduras, when she tried to do jail work with adults, they had cells that they had men and women mixed together in the same cells, and they had dirt floors. And so there were literally babies born in prison because of them housing men and women together in the same cells. So she said she didn't even know where to start with that, to try to get the government to do, to remedy that. So she decided she would go work with the young men that hadn't yet gotten in the adult prisons. So she did that work for 34 of those years in Honduras. She did that. And she rehabilitated lots of boys. She had some great success stories, like some became nurses, some teachers. I think there was a lawyer in there and a dentist, and what she would do is when they were ready to leave the institution, if they had served their sentence honorably and could be let go, then she would rent an apartment in the capital city of Tegucigalpa so that they could live there temporarily while they were going to get a job. And with our donations from up here, she paid for that apartment, and she paid for a bunch of them to go to the university down there. But she would always go in and pay their tuition bill, pay for their books, etc., so that they didn't, scourge, or scam her on the money,
All right. Now, I just want to let you know, before you tell your story, I can't speak for Tommy, but I think I will. We all feel like a bunch of losers. I mean, we have a certain faith, but this is not, for example, like in the discussions with your sisters, like what about God was so powerful, so great in that group that for how many in a row, they all wanted to do the same thing. What was so strong?
Well, it must have been faith. It must have been the Holy Spirit driving them. Yeah, because now the other one, see, what number is she?
9.
Well, I'm number 8, so she had to be number 7. Her name is Felissa. Her old baptized name was Claire Zander, but she's now Sister Felissa Zander, and she has been for 60 years working on an Indian mission outside of Hayward. It's called Reserve, and it's St. Francis Solanus mission. So she too has this great drive to be a missionary. And the Indians love her. She's been up there 60 years.
Do you realize how incredibly special you are? Do you?
Yes, I do. I appreciate this. And in fact, when I pray, when I do my meditation in the morning, I pray to my family, because now there's only 3 of us left out of 11. I pray to them and ask them for their help and support, and I thank them for the heritage of faith that they gave me because it was instilled. I feel like I was born with it. You know, I even have to include my grandparents on my mom's side and my dad's side because they were also very strong in faith. You know, it's really an inheritance, I think, you know.
Well, I assume I'm going to go to heaven. When I do, and I look up to the best house, the biggest house, the highest, I want to be there because I know your family's living there.
Well, it's what makes me not afraid to die, especially now that we have our Patty there. I figure she'll guide me in, you know, to that in that transition, you know. She always was great at that. She was a great person socially that way. So I say, hey, you show me the ropes when I make that transition.
All right, I will defer to Tommy. Normally, it go a little longer, but I want to know what his questions are because I hate to tell you, it's going to be hard to top 7 older sisters, all nuns.
Homer, I know I'm not even worthy and Lois of a meal at that house Homer refers to in heaven, but I can be the groundskeeper or anything like
Yeah.
that. Just to kind of rub elbows, even if from a distance. Lois, it's obvious you're a woman of deep faith. That came across very quickly when I was blessed to sit beside you at a meeting. And you have written a special book. You have lost a very special, beautiful young lady, your
Yes,
daughter. Would you
yes.
please tell us about that tragedy, and especially as it relates to your faith and the
Mhm,
building of that faith with that wonderful
mhm.
support team you had and your loving family that has helped you go forward a day and a moment at a time, please?
Now, I don't know if you can see this, but I thought I would, can you
Please,
see
I'm
this
glad
this
you did.
card? Okay, that you can see what Patty looks like. This is her graduating. She was in an accelerated nursing program at UW Milwaukee, and this is a 2003 picture of her for that graduation. But she had two degrees. She had gone to Marquette in physical therapy and graduated from that in 2001. And then when she got into it and realized that there was so much diagnosis involved, she thought, I want to be working with the patients. I want to be doing the physical therapy. Whereas at that time, it was getting relegated to like you more at a desk and you had to prescribe what kind of therapy they were supposed to have, and other people did it. And she didn't like that. She wanted to work with the patient. So she went into nursing, and because she had already done so many courses at Marquette, it only took her a year and a half then in the accelerated program at UW Milwaukee to get that registered nursing degree. And then she started working at Columbia St. Mary's. She worked in the orthopedic ward, and she was on third shift. And she took third shift because they were giving a bonus if you took that when you came out of college. Well, it turned out to be a very hard thing for her because you have that odd schedule of, you know, you are working when everybody else is sleeping. So like when she would go out with her boyfriend, um, it would turn out they'd go do something social and she'd fall asleep because she didn't have enough sleep. So she wanted to eventually get to something where she was on the same program he was, that she could stay awake when they went out. And then at the same time, when she would try to sleep when it was her time to go to sleep, she had trouble doing it because of anxiety, and this was not her schedule. So anyway, by 2005, she had worked almost 2 years then as a nurse. By that time, she was sleeping terribly, and she had the opportunity to go to first shift. So she did it. And what was a mistake about it, it was for in surgery, at which other people friends of mine that were in nursing said that was way too early in her career to get into something that challenging and that difficult. And she was already told that she was going to have to do a 9-month education program, you know, besides being mentored by somebody. So she had started that education at Columbia St. Mary's to be on first shift in surgery. And the lady that was in surgery with her said that the last day that she worked, said she was focused, she was attentive, but she was very sad. Another friend of hers met her that day at the bank and said she looked very sad, very tired. And we found out later that she hadn't slept for 2 days and 2 nights and had worked, you know, both of those days. And she was finding the transition very difficult. And later on, in looking back at this, I felt I blamed myself because you naturally, even though everything you read says you shouldn't go on this guilt trip, you still have to pass through that and reason that you can't blame yourself because you can't control it. But I did at the time blame myself because transitions were always difficult for her. She always needed a little bit more time to, make such a major change. So I should have suggested to her that when she was going to do this shifting to a more challenging job and on first shift, that she should see a psychologist because um, an incident had happened in 2001 where she needed to do this for anxiety, and it had helped her. It got her through it when she was too depressed. So we knew it was something from that incident in 2001 that I should have been aware of and guided her in that direction, and I didn't. So anyway, that's where we are. And so what had happened is she went home that day. I already described how she hadn't slept for 2 days and 2 nights. So when she went home, she had some, I'm trying to think, Valium. And she had leftover pills from when she had seen the psychologist in 2001. And she used those and she took 2 of them to go to sleep. And she had a history of when she got overtired like this, that then she would sleep so long. I had this happen when she was in high school at home, where sometimes she could sleep 18 hours in a row and then almost have trouble waking her up. So that's what happened that night. She slept and slept. She slept the entire night and she slept the entire workday when she should have been at Columbia St. Mary's. And the hospital had tried to call her twice and she never woke up. And it showed on her cell phone that they had tried twice. And then eventually she woke up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and realized she had missed the entire day of work. And that's what set her off in a panic attack. And so by 5 o'clock that day, she was dead. She jumped out the 6th floor window of her new apartment. She had moved 2 months prior to that to Cudahy so that she could be closer to her boyfriend. And at any rate, it made it farther for her to drive to work to Columbia St. Mary's, but it's the decision that was made at the time. And it was a wonderful apartment. She had a view of Lake Michigan. Um, we still go there on the anniversary of her transition. My husband and I go there, and on her birthday on April 29th, we always go there. And my husband said to me one time, "Why do we always go down there on those days?" And I said, "Because I figure it's a sacred space." She jumped, so there's an outside place where her body was the last time, where she became a spirit. And I reverence that. I think that's it's like in the Bible, holy ground. So on those 2 special days, I always like to go there and experience that. And we sit on a bench by the lake, and after we pass the spot where she died, and then we do some meditation. I have a spiritual reading with me, and we do some meditation and some talking. And on the second anniversary of her transition, we were sitting on that bench together, talking about a special reading that I found in Jesus Calling for June 22nd, because that was the day of her transition. And all of a sudden, somebody grabbed me from the back, and it was our oldest daughter with her boyfriend. They had come down there, and I was so pleased because many times our older daughter finds different kinds of consolation than what we find. We're older people. So this was something that my husband and I like to do, but it didn't mean that she liked to do it. And so it just pleased me so much that she was there at the same time we were, and that she wanted to remember Patty's special day too, which she does.
Lois, your faith, if I may, is obviously so very strong. You talk not about that word death, but about transition. I'd like to get into that, but first of all,
Uh-huh.
a parent's worst nightmare, you're so well aware. And
Yeah.
when you lost Patty, can you explain the emotions that you were feeling initially? I cannot imagine what they
Well,
must.
it was like the agony in the garden that night, because what happened is the way they informed us about it. Bob and I were at a financial meeting at a place where Patty used to work at Davian's at the time that Patty died, which we thought later was so ironical. Here we're sitting at the table telling these people, "Oh, our daughter Patty worked here when she was in high school. She used to cut wedding cake and wait on tables here." And she, at that time, was dying. And at any rate, we were driving home from that meeting, and our daughter Jean calls us because at that time we had one of these old big clubby cell phones, you know, and we were almost home and she's frantic on the phone and she says, Mom, there's something really, really wrong because Steve, that's Patty's boyfriend, he's calling me and he cannot get a hold of Patty. And she said every time Steve calls her cell phone, the Cudahy police answer, but they won't give him any information. And so the message was, you, the parents, are supposed to call the Cudahy police. So that's what she was telling me. Okay, so when we get home, I do that right away. I call the Cudahy police and they won't, well, first it takes them a long time to get the officer that was on the case. Then he comes to the phone and he won't really tell me anything. He just verifies our name, our address, and our phone number. And then because he won't tell me anything, I said, well, can I come down? We can come down there. My husband and I will drive right over there and then you can tell us. He says, no. And then I discover later why he, wouldn't do that. They don't want you down there and then you're hysterical and then, how do you get home? That kind of thing. So they said, what is your closest local police department? So I tell them, okay, we live in the town of Lisbon. Usually Sussex Police takes care of us because at that time we had just turned over to Waukesha County Police Department or Sheriff's Department. So anyway, he says, okay, I will notify them and they will come out and talk to you. Well, right away you're concluding because they're going to come to your house. You're assuming that Patty has died. I did right away, and well, so did my husband. So anyway, it took forever for them to get here. I mean, this call was about 6 p.m. by that time, and they didn't get here till 9:30 p.m. Two, let's see, it was a policeman with a chaplain, and they explained later that it took so long because they wanted to bring a police chaplain with them, who I have to say at the time was kind of worthless, but I shouldn't say that because that's wrong of me to do that. I have to confess that because they are trying to put their best foot forward. But at the time that this happens, there's almost nothing they can say because you are just trying to digest this, And the policeman says, but anyway, what I wanted to say though, is that time between 6 o'clock and 9:30, we said that was an agony in the garden. Now we know what Jesus went through when he was in that Garden of Gethsemane. It was just so like that. And it's when I did my most crying. I cried almost all the time. And in fact, I already had gone to the house where we hang high school graduation picture. And I had looked at that picture and I said, you have to let me know every day that you are okay and happy and not in pain. And I said it right to that picture. And she did that 2 weeks after she died. I have to read it so that I say it right. I'm sorry about that, but I don't want to go and make it up. But 2 weeks after her transition, I was getting out of bed in the morning, that first 7 o'clock in the morning where you want to run to the bathroom right away. And I just swung my legs out of bed and here, oh yeah, it was 7:20 in the morning on July 6th of 2005. And my mind was an absolute blank. I was very groggy from sleeping. And my mind got this message. I'm okay, Mom. I have no pain. And it happened so fast that I sat on the side of the bed and asked myself, what was that? I totally forgot about going to the bathroom and I had to tell my husband what had happened. It was an experience that brought great solace to me. But it's that kind of thing. She did that 3 times during those first 5 months after her transition. And that is what makes me believe in resurrection. I think I said to you at that meeting, I no longer take resurrection as a faith thing. I take it as a fact. The fact that she was able to touch me dramatically 3 times and have that effect on me. I know that her spirit lives, her person lives. And so it's great hope for us that when we have this transition with our physical body, we've still got that eternal life to look forward to. And we'll have it. It will be there for us. So
Somehow you seem to have that peace that transcends all understanding. Lois, with your permission, I'd like to just toss it back to Homer to allow him to go further on this, and then we'll get into your book definitely as it honors Patty. And I know it's a ministry for so many who have gone through parents who have gone through this tragedy. Homer.
Well, I definitely want to go to the book, but I do want to mention that I've addressed and had to address the suicide in our family. It's the worst day of my life. And I always believed that things are part of God's plan, but I could not believe that. I can't believe God's plan would be so mean. There were other issues. And I also believe that God's greatness is the ability to give peace of mind. He did it a certain way for you, I believe. And for me, he just said, you'll never understand. You just have to accept it. My point is, um, how did you accept it? What, other than these events that occurred, what was it, your family, your life? And was there any questioning of you like I've had or had until God responded to me that this is just wrong? But I don't have 7 sisters that are nuns. So
so you're expressing whether, because it was suicide, whether you could accept it or not.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
no
All
one
right.
knows what's going to bother them the most.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a brother who died from brain cancer that was a brilliant scientist. That was hard, but nothing as bad as this. And I don't know if and I'm thinking as a parent, it'd be a
Yeah.
million times worse. This was
Well,
just step nephew.
Well, it is at first. I can't express enough how raw it was at the beginning. I mean, there were times like when we would have to go down to her apartment to clean it out. The first time my husband and I went there, we physically got sick. Both of us did. And when I think of it, how I felt, my stomach was, getting topsy-turvy when I went into her second bedroom where her computer was, because I was trying to find out if there were business things I should take care of first. And at the same time, when I was thinking, I have to get out of here, my husband comes from the other room and he says, let's go home. We have to go and we have to plan when we're going to come and do this. So we both did. Then we talked about it in the car on the way home that first time in there was extremely hard. And so we made a plan that we were going to go there every day and just, if it didn't go well, we were going to leave and then just work our way up. But it was amazing. You would not believe, during the month that we went there and eliminated all her belongings, all her clothes, all her furniture, everything, emptied that place up and cleaned it again. When I closed that door the last time, I had tears in my eyes because I wouldn't be able to come back here anymore. I began to love going there. Now look at, in a month's time, how I changed. At first, I was physically sick and couldn't do it. And by the end of 30 days, I didn't want to leave that place. So that's kind of how everything else worked too, that I investigated. For instance, our family felt very saved by the articles that Father Ron Rolheiser writes. You might be familiar with him. He always wrote a column years ago for the Catholic Herald. And annually he writes a letter, an entry, article on suicide. And he explains very well that, we find it so much easier when people die of cancer or some other kind of kidney disease, whatever it might be, because we can pinpoint it on that physical malady. But we find it so hard when there's something wrong with the brain that we can't see. We find it so hard to accept that. And he compares mental illness to cancer. And just as in cancer, certain people are helped by chemotherapy and other people can't be saved by it. It doesn't work for everybody. And the same thing he says with mental illness. Some people get the right remedies and are saved, other people are not. And those are usually your suicide victims. And he calls them victims. And he always says that we should not say they committed suicide. The reason he takes out the word committed is that requires a decision, because he said so many of them are frantic and not reasoning. They're irrational at the time they do this, so that they aren't really making a rational decision. So he likes to say they died by suicide, and he doesn't say committed suicide. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And now I'm like Tommy, I want to know about the book. Who decided on the book? Who wrote the book? What made you think there should be a book? Am I missing anything, Tommy? You take over.
No, sir. No, I think you're right on. And if you'll just tell us again, is it Healing the Wounds? Would you give us a
Yeah,
title?
yeah. It's Healing the Wound from My Daughter's Suicide. And the subtitle is Grief Translated into Words. And I'm the one that wrote it, so it'll say Lois Severson. And I have to say that it's for sale on Amazon.com. When you go to that site, you type in Lois, Lois, Severson, SEV as in Victor, ERSON, and then my book pops up. But there is another book there now by another Lois Severson. I did not write that. I only wrote this one book on suicide. I have not looked at her book. I don't know. But I do have to say that my book has very good reviews on Amazon. And so I do have a lot of publishing companies calling me. However, I don't want to respond to those publishing companies because the purpose of this book was, well, first of all, it was a culmination of pulling together my own resolution of grief. And it was to share this with other families that have gone through suicide like we did, because I found it very comforting and informational to read their accounts. When this first happened, I would put myself to sleep at night by reading other families' accounts of suicide. I picked up as many of these as I could at the library or at bookstores, etc. And anyway, by reading their accounts, it helped me realize that we were kind of like in a soup together, like a suicide soup, I'd call it, and that we had something in common that we could share. And because those people were brave enough to do it and gave me sleep at night by reading their accounts, I thought I should share ours too, that purpose. So it was to bring some comfort to them and to future families that are going to go through it. And I have had the pleasure, and I say pleasure, by that I mean a consolation of meeting people locally that have told me that it has helped them very much in grieving. And even relatives that didn't have suicide in the family told me there was a lot of grief material in there that helped them for general grieving. It didn't necessarily have to be suicide. Because I do try to bring out what it was that helped me resolve this. And a lot of it had to do with writing. I can't tell you enough how, years ago, I didn't believe so much in journaling, but after I did a lot of meditating on what had happened to Patty in her life, uh, I really did feel I had to journal. And so I had a lot of entries that I could kind of connect and put together to make the book up. But I wanted to probably mention these two special things too. There's two special writings in here. One of them is called Open Hearts, and the other one is called I Grieve. And the one called Open Hearts, my husband and I were on vacation in Puerto Vallarta. At 5:30 in the morning, I wake up and these stanzas keep coming through my head. I can't stop them. And it's just like pretty soon I've got a whole page written. And I had to get up and write it down because I was afraid my mind would forget, that I wouldn't be able to remember it all. But it makes up a whole 8 by 11 page. And so I got it all written down on scrap paper when we were in Puerto Vallarta. And when I came home, I typed it up and added it to what I was going to put in the book. Then a couple years later, about 3 years later, we are on vacation in the Dominican Republic. And 2:30 in the morning, I wake up and this stuff about I grieve comes into my head. And there I get like a whole page and a half. And we, I didn't want to wake my husband up. So I had to use like almost like a street light that was outside the resort window here. I used that to write it down on napkins inside that resort because it was kind of a humble little place. It wasn't a real fancy one. And but I mean, that one has brought me great consolation as well as to other people. And both experiences, I felt so much that I was not the writer. I felt like it was God and Patty writing this, and I had to write it down. So to me, those were phenomenal experiences. It made me think of when they tell us that scripture is inspired and we have trouble understanding that. how the evangelists could have written this or St. Paul could have written that. Um, we have trouble understanding that until you experience something of that nature, where the pen drives you and you have to keep writing and writing, and it isn't your thoughts. Someone is feeding you those thoughts, which again, to me, that makes one believe more and more in eternal life, in the spirit world, that kind of thing. That kind of holy world, I should say. Does that make sense?
It does. And you talk about this resolution of grief. And for people who maybe right now don't have a clue, and I'm with Homer, everybody should read your beautiful book, particularly if you've lost a child, experience tragedy of that nature. But what do you tell that person who just maybe doesn't have the same faith, or maybe does and is just beaten down so much that it's like life's over? What hope can you give them through your experiences, Lois, as well as this?
Well,
Allow them to go forward, still grieving until you see Patty again with your wonderful family in that special house Homer referred to.
in our mansion built in the
Yeah,
sky. Yeah.
imagine.
Well, first of all, when you say that to say to other people, one thing I try to be really careful about is not to be preachy to them, but to be able to listen, especially at the beginning when you have a relationship with somebody that's grieving something so grave. Like right now, I just talked to a lady this week who moved back to Puerto Rico, and her husband died at 35. I strongly suspect that he died of suicide. And I work in the bereavement ministry through our parish, and his funeral was there. So I send them booklets from the Stephen ministry. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're wonderful 4 booklets that help people with grieving during the first year. At any rate, I'm in charge of sending those out to every funeral we have at our parish. And when I talked to her, because I had to get a new address for her because she moved back to Puerto Rico, I could just tell until she volunteers to me that he died by suicide. There was just something in the obit that made me believe it. And so I want to stay in touch with her and see if she'll eventually confide in. I think she will, because she has, well, what I'm trying to stress is it was important for me to just listen to her and to ask her if she had any support and that she could have my phone number to call anytime, that kind of thing. So then when I sent her a booklet, I wrote a personal letter to her and told her about Patty. And I thought if I open up about my situation, then it may make her comfortable to tell me how her 35-year-old husband died. Because I didn't want to just ask it unless she wanted to volunteer it. But the other point I guess I wanted to make is another person that I talked with in fact, I still stay in touch with, and this is going on about 5 years, whose husband died by suicide. The first 3 years that I saw her monthly, we would get together and have big talks. I listened mostly so that she could really, because she had 3 adolescent boys at the time this happened. So this was really traumatic for her. And she had this idea that because of how he died and was refused and turned away from the hospital, that he wouldn't have died if the hospital would have kept him there like they were supposed to. So she wanted to sue the hospital. And instead of telling her, you really shouldn't sue them, instead I just listened for 3 years to her about that. And eventually, with us just talking about it all the time, she just totally resolved that she didn't have to do that. It was real interesting to watch that in her because I thought, even though I have reasoned in my head that she can't do this, that it doesn't make sense, that doesn't convince her of it. And she has to get that out of her system herself. You get what I mean? And
Well,
it was wonderful to hear her resolve to that herself after 3 years. But I was mainly a listening post to her. But I also acquired a great friend. She is a wonderful person, just a wonderful person, and has been through so much that I value her friendship very much, very much.
the
Um,
abundant blessings coming out of your book. You and Patty are just ministering to so many. Homer, any other thoughts from you?
I have just one final question because this is Tommy sets these up, and I go, man, we need Jesus next time. You've set a standard. These stories are incredible. But I'm curious, uh, not that suicide aside, but just you run into somebody, Lois, who has a faith and they just want your input, and you have 60 seconds, 30 seconds for you to tell them what you think is most important with a relationship, or whatever you want to say to them that best explains your faith story or your power, or try to help them, and they don't know anything about you, and you got 60 seconds, what would you say?
Well, I have to say that's a tough one, Homer. That's very tough. Um, I don't know. The reason I'm kind of tongue-tied on that one is because about a year ago, some very close friends of ours told us, the family, the husband told me that he just doesn't believe in church anymore or any religion. He's even doubting a belief in God, that kind of thing. And I was angry with myself that I didn't come back with arguments with him. But he had been drinking a lot of alcohol, so I thought, what's the use? That was kind of the way I put it. So I never argued with him, but I've always been ashamed of myself that I didn't. So if it would happen again, I would give him my 2 cents worth of why I believe it. And I would have to go back to my relationship with Patty, our raising of our kids, um, our family relationship, my husband and myself, um, I would have to go back to that, I think, and try to illustrate that, there's something beyond this life here. Um, the other, I don't know if this is related right now to your direct question here, what would help, but,
Yes, it is.
well, okay. Okay, but what I shared at the meeting where I met Tom over at the Vincent de Paul office is we had a wonderful, wonderful Vincent de Paul meeting. I'm a spiritual advisor for our conference, and one of our sessions, I took a section from this series called The Chosen. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Sure.
You are?
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, it was an episode that aired on November 17th of 2022. And it was where Jesus was talking to little James. I loved it that he calls him little James, because in the church they say James the Greater and James the Lesser. And I always thought that was a put down to call him James the Lesser. It's terrible. So Jesus in this series calls him little James because he's shorter than the other guy. And he calls the other one big James because he's taller. Anyway, in this conversation, it's wonderful because Jesus illustrates that you have a lameness here in your walking. But and then James says to Jesus, well, why don't you cure me of it? You're curing all these other people. Why aren't you curing me? And Jesus explains to him that with this malady, and people see this, and yet they see you go out there and doing good work and healing other people and doing all this wonderful preaching, you will open up people's eyes better than somebody that doesn't have something wrong with them. And I think that's such a good example. That hit home to me right away. Because I thought, at first, because there's suicide in your family, you want to think, oh, people are going to look at you and say there's something wrong with you. But you can still survive. You can resolve this. You can accept God's will in your life and go out and help other people. Like Jesus was telling little James to do. Go out and help them. And so that's what we're doing in Vincent de Paul. My husband and I are greatly involved in it now, doing home visits, this kind of thing. And we're in the bereavement ministry of helping people grieve. So to us, that's very important now. And I have to say, it's two ministries we may never have been involved in had not Patty transitioned the way she did. So right there, when you brought out before the why thing, maybe that's in God's big plan why it happened, and maybe it wasn't a mean thing or something to be angry about. Maybe it was leading us on a path to holiness.
Well,
We
I
don't know
wish
for
to
sure.
thank you for answering my question brilliantly, even though you don't realize you did.
Well, I hope I did, but
You did.
I was probably too much all over the place there on
Now
that.
you got extra time. Tommy.
Yeah, Homer has taught me too, and we learned in our business, there's a rap sign. There's a time, Tommy, there's nothing to add to that, because Lois, it was absolutely marvelous. Obviously, Patty is with you. The Holy Spirit is with you, and we thank you for introducing that precious child to you, and to certainly to all of us. And I know we can't wait to meet her by the grace of God. It's just wonderful.
Yes.
And one more time, Lois Severson, on your book and where it's available, please.
Okay, it's Healing the Wound from My Daughter's Suicide. And the subtitle is Grief Translated into Words. And you find it on Amazon.com. Once you're on the site, you type in Lois Severson and the book pops up. And then you can read the reviews and decide if you want to buy it or not. But I hope it helps people. That's the purpose of it. That's the
Yes,
purpose.
yes, you can tell it is, and will continue to touch souls. So, Lois, on behalf of Homer and myself and our producer, Brent Young, thank you again for being our guest on My Faith with Homer and Pip. God bless you as you continue to make a difference for souls. You, your husband, Patty, it's just awesome. Thanks again, and God bless you.
Well, thank you for this opportunity.
You bet. For the Homer and for Brent Young, I'm Tommy Pippins. Thanks for joining us on My Faith with Homer and Pip. We hope and pray, as always, that what was heard here will help you on your journey to and through the cross of Christ. We may be on a different road, but we have that final destination that is common to all of us. Take care. Look forward to next time.
Thank you.